Good evening. Tonight's topic is spiritual direction for Gnostics. Bishop Peterson, I'm going to ask you, this is a topic I don't think maybe a lot of Gnostics are really kind of familiar with. What exactly, or how would you define what is spiritual direction?
Well, actually, this is a question that we got from a viewer who wanted us to do a show about how Gnostics could find spiritual direction. And it kind of piqued my interest because within a lot of mainstream religion, spiritual direction has been a real hot topic lately. And spiritual direction simply is a form of spiritual companionship. It's a relationship where a person, a directee, approaches a skilled and trained spiritual director for companionship as the directee develops his or her spirituality, his or her prayer life, his or her. In many cases, spiritual direction may be a part of a person's vocational formation process if they're discerning a call to the ministry. And it may also be a part of a person's development of a serious prayer practice as well. Now, I would point out that this is spiritual companionship. It is not psychotherapy, counseling, pastoral care, nor is it really a student-teacher relationship. The director usually has more experience in the area of spiritual development than the directee, but the director is not really necessarily acting entirely as a teacher, as we're used to in some of our traditions, Bishop Ken.
Interesting. Doing a little bit of research on this topic myself, I had seen that, some of the cases that were kind of cited for this really goes back into the early centuries.
Yes.
You see it a lot, especially in the Orthodox Church, and a lot with the early church fathers and the early desert fathers. But in that, I think my first impressions were still kind of this student, teacher, mentor, even though I can very much see it is a companionship. I still kind of, for me, I kind of still kind of seen that student-teacher relationship. Maybe you could help maybe explain a little further on how it really kind of differs between a student-teacher relationship and that of, as you would define it, as spiritual companionship.
Right. I would also point out that there probably are going to be people who disagree on that particular point. And I'm speaking of modern day practices, maybe not so much as what it's been in the past, but what more modern day practices, particularly among, say, Protestant spiritual directors or interfaith spiritual directors. So there may very well be some differences, and I would say probably within some of the Eastern Orthodox traditions, there may be far more authority given to the spiritual director than you might see in some other traditions as well. So you have an excellent point there. Gotcha.
Now, what would you consider some of the sources of spiritual direction?
Well, typically speaking, spiritual directors can be lay people. They can also be clergy. There's no reason why a lay person can't be a spiritual director, at least in many traditions. Typically, these days, spiritual directors ideally have had formal training in spiritual direction. This may include courses taken in seminary. That's one possible source of training. Another one, there are standalone certificate programs that spiritual directors can enter, and it's usually a combination of both practical training, that is to say, offering spiritual direction under supervision, as well as taking coursework and meeting with a cohort of other students as well. So typically, for spiritual directors, do and ought to, in many cases, have very specific training in spiritual direction itself.
Gotcha. Now, I guess when I'm approaching this topic and, kind of just looking in at this, for me, I guess I would take spiritual direction, if we're talking about spiritual companionship, as being able to kind of spend time with a student very much one-on-one. If we want to use student, in this, but kind of very much a one-on-one personal, where we may help them to kind of review what practices are, whether it is their prayer life, whether it is what they're reading, maybe a little bit of their spiritual thoughts and things that they've been having. And I think it probably works well in kind of the methods that I like to use, which really isn't giving them a lot of feedback. Basically just being that ear for them to kind of bounce things off of. Obviously, if you see things that are like, whoa, okay, this is really out there, maybe kind of try to change their course and have them kind of reevaluate something, but without really giving one's own personal, well, this is how I would do it, you know? Would you kind of agree with the kind of assessment?
I think that, in your case, that would probably be a very good approach. I think, again, there are going to be different styles, and there's going to be different needs. I mean, some students may need a bit more in the way of direction, actual direction, and as well as accountability. Okay, we talked about you were going to pray this many times during the week, say your rosary, do some devotional reading. How often did you meet your goals? Okay, if you didn't, well, why not? The other thing is that in some cases you are going to have people who are slipping into advanced wackadoodlery, and at some point you need to say, "Hey, you dork nozzle, you're getting crazy here.
Right.
Let's pull back a little bit. Let's look at your responsibilities in the real world, and let's step back a little bit and let's find a healthier way for you to work with your spirituality until you're at a point where you've maybe advanced a little bit more and have a little bit more maturity and experience." So I think that there's going to be different styles, both based on the character and the personality of the director, as well as the needs of the directee.
Interesting. Yeah, I can really much see your point is that some students may very much need direction. I know in a lot of the practices that we practice both within my particular church and also in many of the esoteric orders that I'm a member of, we have very well-defined practices. Morning prayers, afternoon prayers, evening prayers, various invocations, various things that are supposed to be done daily. Sometimes that can seem to the outsider overwhelming because, you could spend literally hours in prayer if you're a member of all these various things and you need to do them. So, this is why, for me, I've always encouraged students to make a journal of these things, record them. And, when I've acted as a spiritual director, one of my jobs is kind of reviewing these things. Like I said, sometimes slapping them on the wrist saying, hey, why isn't this not getting done? Kind of an old cliche to kind of paraphrase it is that, sometimes an ounce of actual work is better than hours of preaching.
Absolutely.
So for me, actually getting people to actually work and not just read or not just, kind of, what
mentally masturbate? Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I'm glad you said it. That was right up the tip of my tongue. But yes, I use that phrase a lot. Mental masturbation. I mean, it becomes mental masturbation, and without them actually doing actual work. And I think that, I think that a spiritual director and spiritual direction can definitely keep that person, student, focused upon staying the path.
And keeping them focused using a tradition that has been proven to work, that has been proven effective and safe over time. Because the one thing about mental masturbation, like the real kind, is that it can put you into a right state of ecstasy, but there isn't anything particularly productive about it. And, so there you go. And it's really, really important to bring that person back down from that high and say, okay, you had this experience, you still need to be doing this work, or else, or else you're just going to be off in la la land over there. So absolutely. Now, one concern that the person who suggested this topic had is, where is a modern Gnostic going to find spiritual direction? And I think that's a legitimate concern because a lot of spiritual directors are trained in mainstream religious traditions, which is fine. But that means that there may be some difficulties when that spiritual director approaches Gnosticism with suspicion or just ignorance. So I think that this is a concern, and I don't have a whole lot of easy answers. I do have some recommendations, however.
Well, for me, and I think, our recommendations may be different on this. For me, I would, if someone was asking me that, I would say definitely check with your Gnostic clergy, your bishops and your priest. Every priest that I know in a true Gnostic tradition has gone through some intense training themselves. And I think, therefore, they are more than qualified to assist. I think those also who are members of certain esoteric and initiatory societies, specifically SIs and free initiators of Martinism, members of the Yale Cohen. I think those particular orders in general have very strict disciplines and strict practices that can definitely help a person if they're looking for that kind of structured practice. I think what I would avoid is kind of, the internet, Facebook, social media guru out there who, even though, we are on social media ourselves, but those who really don't seem to have, any form of actual training or any form of organization or tradition or anything behind them.
Sure.
You probably want to run away from those folks.
Yeah, and the thing is, there is an organization called Spiritual Directors International. They're at www.sdiworld.org, and they can help people connect with spiritual directors who have been credentialed, as well. And there's an organization also known as the Chaplaincy Institute. chaplaincyinstitute.org, and they actually train interfaith spiritual directors. And that might be, maybe some resources there, not only for people who are interested in spiritual direction, but for Gnostic clergy and lay people. No, you're not required to be clergy to be a director. Who are interested in learning spiritual direction skills. I think that's important because, as well intended as we might be, and even though we've had our own experiences, it can be very helpful for somebody who is going to be offering direction to individuals, particularly people who they don't know very well. It can be helpful for them to understand some of the ethics, when to say, this person has a psychological problem and needs mental health support rather than rather than spiritual direction. Those things can be very helpful for an individual. And I would say that this may be an area also that we as Gnostics this is something that we ought to be developing, largely because of the incredibly personal nature of our religion.
Sure, absolutely. That kind of brings me on to kind of my next kind of question in this, or topic for us to discuss, is that how frequently do you think that people need to be meeting? There seems to be kind of two various approaches. Kind of that of regular meetings, whether that is weekly or every 2 weeks or a month or even less frequent than that. And also kind of that of spiritual retreats where people go away for a 3-4 day weekend where they're kind of filled, with this, maybe with other like-minded individuals. I have participated in Gnostic retreats, things like Conclave that is coming up. And I've also done, more kind of individual meeting with people. I think both are powerful, that they're totally different energies. And I think that the effectiveness are different for different people and on different spectrums. Your thoughts on that?
I think that, regularly meeting with somebody on a weekly or a bi-weekly or even a monthly basis can be very helpful. If you're trying to maintain accountability for a daily spiritual practice, which I think is important. I fall down on this, a lot of people do, but I think is really essential to have that kind of regular contact. I am all for having a spiritual director as somebody who can ground people during retreats. that sort of thing. I have to say, while I like retreats, I find that they can sometimes be deceptive, in that you have kind of a hot box going on, where there's a lot of energy there, and it's very easy to fall into self-deception or to create a psychological crisis or trauma or high, and mistake that for some kind of enlightenment.
Right.
And so, I mean, a good spiritual director can pull you back down. Absolutely. A bad one's going to take advantage of all that, and you're going to walk out of the retreat, maybe on a high or in a fragile state. Something happens that then yanks you back down, and you're outside of that hot box atmosphere, and that can be really traumatic for people. So I would encourage people to have a regular spiritual director, and to be cautious when working with spiritual directors that you don't know while on retreat.
That's pretty interesting, and I think that is kind of pretty much very key, is going to these retreats and things with people you don't know. It's one thing if it's involved, let's say, with a regular group. Let's just, for an example, use the group that you work with on a regular basis in Chicago. If you guys had a weekend kind of spiritual retreat, well, you know everybody, you're going to kind of know the energies, it's all going to work well. But now all of a sudden you just read a little blurb on the particular internet, you know nothing about these people, you know nothing about the group, but it sounds interesting. Hey, spiritual retreat, I want to go check this out. You really don't know the energies, and you really don't know how that's going to really affect you. So I think that people really have to kind of have their guards up, and really, if you're going to be having spiritual direction, I think that regular, consistent spiritual direction is a lot better than kind of just a one-time thing.
Absolutely. Well, all right, Bishop Ken, we do have some news this week.
Fantastic. What do we got?
Well, first of all, there's been an article been going around Facebook on social media. Professor April DeConnick, who's a professor down at Rice University, has basically laid the smackdown on those mainstream scholars who want to make the early Gnostics out to be stupid or crazy. And Professor Connick writes about this at her blog, forbiddengospels.blogspot.com. There's a long string there, but if you just go to that blog right now, the article will come up. It's her latest article. And she basically challenges the idea by saying, look, some of the early Christian apologists and non-Christian critics of Christianity did engage the Gnostics. They obviously regarded them as being worthy of engagement, and these people were not stupid. They were not crazy. They were different.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting when people are willing to, who don't like a point of view, are willing just to dismiss it as crazy. Or these people are ignorant, and you begin to wonder what they're afraid of. So I'm kind of happy to see Professor DeConnick take these people on in her most recent blog post, and I would encourage all of our watchers or listeners to have a look at it and read it. It's a great article.
Interesting.
The other thing is that I have started yet another blog in service to the Gnostic community. It's called indieclergy.com, INDIECLERGY.com, and it is a blog documenting ministry resources for sacramental and Gnostic clergy. The idea is that many of us have independent ministries. We don't have denominational officials telling us where we can buy things or get legal support or find out about accounting laws or things like that. So what I'm doing is I'm going around the internet and I'm finding quality resources and writing them up for people to peruse and use if they wish. So there you go.
God, that just sounds fantastic, because so many of those types of resources, I think, are very difficult, especially for smaller Gnostic churches.
Yeah.
Even for people in larger communities who may have multiple parishes, etc. Sometimes even the local clergy aren't quite familiar with many of the laws and things. I think that's a fantastic resource. I hope everyone kind of takes advantage of you doing all of the work for them. So very, very cool. Well, As typical, I think this has been a really interesting topic for us. I really appreciate all the feedback. We've been having some fantastic comments back and forth on our Talk Gnosis Facebook page, as well as on our YouTube channel. We do appreciate it from all of our listeners. Make sure that you leave us comments. You can always send us an email at talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com. Any news on what's coming up for our next show?
Well, I've got a guest in the wings. I don't want to promise he's going to be on yet, and I do know that Monsignor Jordan Stratford will be joining us in a future show as well. So
awesome.
we've got some stuff lined up, and we'll be letting folks know about it on the Facebook page.
Fantastic.
All right, and as always, this has been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends, click the like button, and subscribe to our channel. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the views of Gnostic NYC or any other organizations. No animals were harmed during the production of this show. For more Talk Gnosis, tune in every Wednesday for new episodes. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.